Hello friends, today we got a bit more Nintendo news for you today, but unfortunately it is not good news, at least for the emulation community. So Nintendo has taken another huge swing at Nintendo Switch emulation, this time getting more than 400 emulator repositories removed from GitHub. And if that sounds familiar, well it probably should, because this is nowhere near the first time Nintendo has done this. So earlier this month, on August 17th, 2026, Nintendo submitted 7 separate DMCA takedown notices to GitHub targeting repositories connected to Nintendo Switch emulators. And these 7 notices ultimately resulted in 401 repositories being removed. So just to be clear, this doesn't mean that there were 401 completely different Nintendo Switch emulators floating around on GitHub. A lot of these repositories were forks, mirrors, or modified versions of the existing projects. The biggest target by far was Suyu, one of the projects that emerged after the shutdown of the popular Yuzu emulator. GitHub says that particular network contained 311 repositories, and because Nintendo argued that forks were infringing in essentially the same way as the original repository, GitHub processed the takedown across the entire network. And unfortunately, other projects were caught up in the latest takedowns, including Skyline, which is an Android-based Switch emulator. Also MonoNX, which was written in C#, and along with various other Yuzu forks, Yuzu Android versions, and other projects based on Yuzu's original code. Skyline accounted for another 29 repositories, while the remaining takedowns included MonoNX and 7 smaller networks of Yuzu-derived projects. So what is Nintendo actually arguing here? Well, Nintendo says Switch games are protected by technological protection measures, or TPMs, including encryption that relies on Nintendo's proprietary cryptographic keys, commonly referred to as prod.keys. According to Nintendo, Switch emulators used unauthorized copies of these keys to decrypt Switch games at or immediately before runtime. Nintendo argues that these emulators are therefore designed to circumvent its copy protection systems, and that distributing them amounts to what it calls unlawful trafficking in circumvention technology under the DMCA. Which is definitely not as fun as doing the YMCA if you ask me. Anyway, Nintendo has been pursuing this argument very aggressively for a while now. In fact, back in May 2024, GitHub received another Nintendo DMCA notice relating to Yuzu. That one DMCA notice resulted in GitHub processing an absolutely enormous network of 8,535 repositories, including forks and copies containing Yuzu code or code based on Yuzu. And this actually happened shortly after one of Nintendo's biggest moves against Switch emulation, which was in February 2024, when Nintendo sued Tropic Haze LLC, which was a company that was behind the Yuzu Nintendo Switch emulator. Nintendo accused Yuzu of facilitating piracy on a massive scale and argued that the emulator circumvented the technological protections built into the Switch games. One of Nintendo's biggest examples involved The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, where the game officially launched on May 12, 2023, but complete copies of the game began circulating online on May 1st, which was around a week and a half before the release of the game. According to Nintendo's lawsuit, between May 1st and May 10th, those pirated copies were successfully downloaded more than 1 million times, with another million downloaded attempts recorded. Nintendo also claimed that more than 20% of the downloaded links it monitored specifically referred to emulation in their title, URL, or file name, with many mentioning Yuzu directly. Nintendo argued that this case was evidence of Yuzu helping to facilitate what it described as piracy on a colossal scale. And the lawsuit, well, it didn't last very long. Tropic Haze and Nintendo reached an agreement only days later, and on March 6th, a final judgment permanently prohibited Tropic Haze from developing or distributing Yuzu emulation. Nintendo was awarded a massive $2.4 million, the Yuzu project was shut down, its website was surrendered, and the injunction also required the deletion of copies of Yuzu and related circumvention tools under Tropic Haze's control. But as Nintendo quickly discovered, shutting down the original project didn't make all of that open source code disappear from the internet overnight. Yuzu spawned forks and successors, which is why we've since seen names like Suyu appearing, and also why Nintendo has continued targeting GitHub repositories containing any of that code. In fact, Nintendo was still targeting numerous Switch emulators earlier this year, including projects such as Citron, Eden, Kenji NX, Melno NX, Pine, Pomelo, Ryubing, Ryujinx, Skyline, Sudachi, Sumi, Suyu, and Yuzu. And now another 401 repositories have all but disappeared from GitHub. Whether Nintendo can ever completely remove Switch emulation code from the internet is another question entirely. Once open source software has been copied and redistributed enough times, it's extremely difficult to put that genie back in the bottle. But one thing certainly does seem clear. Nintendo has absolutely no intention of giving up that fight. So let me know, what do you think? Is Nintendo in the right to be this aggressive when it comes to Switch emulators? Or do you think legitimate emulation is getting caught in the crossfire? Game preservation is a real thing, and I'd really hate to see some of these titles get lost behind a paywall or just forgotten about by Nintendo. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments on this matter. Also, I'm sorry if I murdered some of the names of these emulators, it's not my forte. Also, give this video a like, make a comment, share it around with your friends and all that good stuff. And with all that said, I'll catch you soon, my friends. Bye.